Eric Tessmer. Louise Hines. Katie Schwartz. Melinda Doles. Simi Petnaik. Pat Driscoll. Sharon Van Leer.
Here. Next is our Pledge of Allegiance. Will we please stand? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have 3.0, the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Louise, second by Eric or Melinda? Eric? Okay. All those approved, say aye.
Aye.
Those say no, motion carries. Next, 4.0, and that is comments to the board. You want to read that?
Let me turn on my microphone. At this time, individuals may speak to the school board on any items relating to South Washington County Schools.
Next agenda item is 5.0, and that is our consent agenda item.
All consent items are considered routine and non-controversial by the school board and will be approved by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. Prior to the meeting, board members have had the opportunity to review each of these items and may request that one item be moved to the action items for individual consideration. That did not happen this evening, so we will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carried. Next is on our agenda is 6.0 information items. 6.1 is our financial update that will be presented this evening by our Director of Finance and Operations, Dan Pine.
Good evening, Chair Van Leer, members of the school board, Superintendent Nielsen. Tonight I'll be giving our monthly financial update. As you know that you approved your budget at your June 16th meeting. The charge of the board is to give you an update every month, and we try to focus those updates on different topics. And tonight's update will be on how we develop our financial forecasts. We are about almost 3 months into this year's budget already, and we like to keep track of what's going on so we know maybe how we'll end up, and as we look at the audit to see how we'll start. Actually, we started the year, but we don't know what our starting numbers are yet. I could start with the story for you, Sharon. Got to be thinking about a while ago, a long time ago. People used to what we call window shop. So I was, walking through Minneapolis with a friend of mine, and as we were walking, she was looking through the windows and she saw something she liked in the store. She went inside the store and she was actually very attractive, just a friend. And she asked the clerk, she said, "Can I try on that dress in the window?" And he looked at her and he's like, "Yeah, sure. But we have changing rooms too." So as we talk about forecasts, we talk about assumptions, and obviously he was assuming that she was going to change in the window. So why do we do our forecasts? Well, we always need to project our fund balance. As you know, our fund balance is our barometer. It's our district's checkbook. It's monitored by the Department of Education, meaning that it cannot fall below -2.5% of our operating expenditures. If it does fall below that, the district goes into what's called statutory operating debt. So with that in mind, that's how we monitor our financial health, is where our fund balance is at. We've always had a policy of 5 to 9%, and this board has raised that policy to say that we should have a 16.6% fund balance. And what does that mean? That means that we essentially would have 2 months of operating expenditures in our reserves. We know that's difficult because, different demands come across for costs, and costs go up, and sometimes revenue doesn't go up as fast. So the idea of the board was that we would shoot for the 16.6% in the next 5 years. So actually the goal of this through the policy is to hit 16.6% by the year 2027. Why else do we project our fund balance and look at projections? Well, we need to know if we do have the resource. We need to know if we have to make adjustments to it, have to make cuts. We went through that a couple of years ago. And as we look at our projections, we have to work with assumptions. And we have to work with, the totals we have coming in, and we have to base it on many, many assumptions. And we always base it on the best information we have today, because everything that we tell you about projections is wrong. I mean, there's no way we're going to be exactly right about any of this. All we can ask is that you agree with the assumptions. So what are our assumptions? Well, on the enrollment side, we assumed a pretty conservative approach of just taking the history of what's happened over the last 10 years per grade and figuring out how much it changes per grade on the average. And then we put that in, I put that into my projected enrollment for budget reasons. And that's called the cohort survival method. Our projection shows a very slight increase in overall enrollment percent-wise. Obviously, we're such a big district that 1% is almost 200 students. So this projection is about 5% over 5 years, 185 students per year. And some of the factors are, what's the kindergarten class going to look like? That's the one we don't know. I know what's in all the other classes. And I know when kids come off the private school side into the public school side. I know what generally happens between second and third grade, but I don't know what's going to happen in kindergarten. So then we look at birth rates. We also have to look at some other options students have, enrollment options like open enrollment to other districts, and then of course open enrollment into our district. And then we also have post-secondary enrollment options, meaning that students paid for by the state can attend college level classes in college. So we do not get credit for those students. And then we kind of look at the history of when do we start seeing drops? When does the enrollment drop over the year? Seen this many times, so this is what we're projecting, for the next 5-year look at our budget. Like I said, an increase about 185 students per year. By the end of 2027, we're looking at about 19,528 students. This is a chart of the birth rate, so we actually do look at the birth rates. So we have to find out how many people, children were born in our county each year. We can also, get even deeper and look at the birth rate for each city, but for this purpose, we just use the county. And you can see what I call the capture rate. We basically take the birth rate, and then we look at 6 years later for that fall, how many kids we had in kindergarten. So for instance, in 2014, 2,880 children were born in this county, and our kindergarten class was 1,382. So that's almost a 49% capture rate. And I find it interesting that our capture rate is higher than the actual percentage of we have of population in the county. At the last count, Washington County had 259,000 people that lived in it, and we have about 109,000 that live in our district, which is about a 42% rate, and we're capturing more than that. Now, that could be a factor of maybe our district has more younger families that live in it, less open areas, maybe we have less older populations, so we might have a higher concentration of births in our district property. And most of our district property, except for more on the south side, is residential as opposed to, a lot of commercial base. So I look at the birth rates, and that helps me kind of project what kindergarten is going to be in these future years. Now that, that is somewhat of a crapshoot sometimes too, but the birth rate is kind of the easiest thing to look at. So as we look at enrollment, and I move this number around a lot, and actually we did see, as we're looking at more counts, every day, that we did see 2023 go down a little bit from here. But as I look at this, I like to study this and see, what the survival rates are for each class. And I also like to see which class has the highest enrollment. And that kind of tells me, where the bubble is going through. The other factor for enrollment for revenue is that we get paid more for students in secondary school than we do in elementary school. So as our bubble hits 7th grade and goes down to 12th, we're getting a higher concentration of revenue coming in. And you can see by this chart that, since 14-15, that 3rd grade class was the highest class of the group all the way up to last year. And now the 9th grade class is the highest, and that one, and then for some reason 2025 is the 5th grade class, and then the 12th grade class. You're going to see kind of a different survival trend when you get into the high school, because sometimes you're going to see, well, first of all, you're going to see the private kids that come out of 8th grade going to 9th grade, but some of that has to do with how big those classes are. And then you're also going to see some changes as they go into PSEO. On the revenue side, as we assume things, some are easy. The basic formula, which is set by state legislature. In 2023, it's $6,863 per pupil unit, which is basically per student. The formula is increased 2.5% in 2022 and 2% in 2023. So what we have to decide, do we assume what's it going to do in the years that the legislature, the laws have not been passed yet? So for this model, right now I'm assuming 2% in each of the next 4 years. There's also a large surplus at the state legislature we don't know what's going to happen with. And if they push some of that money towards things like the special ed cross subsidy, that could make a big difference in our fund balance. Other revenue assumptions, we have to look at the federal dollars we get, and we pretty much assume they're always going to be flat. We don't really see big increases in our federal title and federal special education dollars. The fees and others, those remain pretty flat. State special education aid, we basically look at what we think we're going to spend there and increase the aid because it increases with expenses. And then the operating referendum, which we know is set now since we're pretty much at the cap. We're not going to be going out for more operating referendum, but we also know that now it increases with inflation, which is really going to help out our fund balance. And it's really just have to look to see what the state's guessing on inflation for the next 5 years. On the expenditure side, we assume our wages and benefits. We have to make some assumptions on what we'll end up settling our negotiations at. We negotiate with 11 unions. 8 of them are in the general fund alone. We have to look at the percentage of salaries and wages. So I basically look at the salaries and wages and try to throw some percentages in that I guess we might settle at. That's known as a cost of living adjustment. We have to look at steps. Steps are employees make more money the longer they stay in many, many contracts. But there's also caps on those steps. There's lanes for teacher contracts, and those I just kind of have to talk to HR and say, what's been happening? How many people have been moving on the lane side of it? That's if they get higher education, then they'll go over one, and that gets more wages for the teachers. Generally, our agreements are 2 years, which makes it difficult to project 5 years out. And we also have to make sure we increase our payroll taxes as they go up along with the wages. And then we look at the other costs, the ones that people are more used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis in their own homes, utility and fuel costs. We know that we're through a period of inflation right now. Professional services. For us, substitute teachers and paras, the needs for subs and the market rate for substitute teachers and paras is very high. Things like snow removal, waste removal, it makes a big difference if you have a bad winter or not. I mean, that could move our fund balance between $300,000 and $400,000. Of course, textbook cycles, instructional supplies, and then just general repair supplies. For my models, I'm using a 2.5% average, and I know you're saying, well, things are going a bit faster than that, but then we have to kind of stick with this controllable expense at 2.5%, and we just have to make it work. We may have to buy less things, or provide less services, or cut back on our capital. And then some miscellaneous expenses that we have to assume that I use in our models is retirements, which really helps out balancing out some of those percent increases, because as teachers retire, we save about $30,000 per retirement, meaning that the person that replaces them are coming in at a lot lower level on the scale than the ones that are leaving. And we have about 30 of those a year, so we can buffer maybe $900,000 a year just on teacher retirements. And we also have to know that staffing will increase with enrollment. So as enrollment goes up, I have to add staff. Basically in this district, as we talk about licensed staff, we add a licensed staff for pretty much every 17 to 18 students. And then as we look at new buildings and rentals, as we struggle to fill space for some of our things, we have to rent buildings. We have to take those into account too. And if we build new buildings, we have to put in new operating expenses. We knew that when we built Altman that we were gonna have an extra $1 million in operating expenses, so we had to plan for that. So with that, right now, as we put those assumptions into our model, then we look at where we're gonna be. And mainly because of the referendum passing and the inflation being put on there, it looks like, you know, our revenues should be able to keep ahead of our expenditures for at least the next 5 years. And that we should be able to, you know, depending on what we're assuming right now, that we should be able to get really close to our fund balance goal of about 16%. So with that, I'll take any questions. I thank you for your time and your attention.
Are there any questions for Dan on the board? Oh, Demi?
I have a question. What a shock. So, Dan, I just had one question. So you mentioned that there's 185 new students per year for the next 5 years, right? That's what you're projecting, roughly?
Yeah,
like
roughly,
right?
yeah.
And so that's like almost 1,000 kids. So is that 1,000 kids independent of what we were, of all the new housing children, or is that factored into those new housing? Is that just a subset of the new housing, the children that will
No,
come from new housing?
this is just with our current operations. I didn't really factor in any new housing. I didn't use the projections from the new housing.
Okay.
Just because I have to be conservative in our revenue looks at. I mean, if we have more students come in, I can figure a way to budget it, don't worry.
Just to clarify,
I can't find a place to put them, but I can sure take the revenue from them.
does that mean you're just counting the children born?
Yeah, and the cohort survival.
Okay, all right.
Looking at, sometimes they come from different directions. Like, the birth rate is really just used to figure out what kindergarten's gonna
Okay,
be.
all right.
I can't figure out all the reasons why we always have a jump from like first to second grade. I mean, there's probably some social reasons or whatever, or,
You'll need a crystal ball for that.
right. Well, you'd have to go door to door and interview everybody to see what their attitude in school is.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Dan, I know you've talked with us about this before, but could you mention a couple of the benefits of moving to that 2 months of general fund reserve?
Well, it just gives you a lot more flexibility. One big thing I found when we did this in my other districts and we moved it to 2 months was that it took a lot of pressure off negotiations because you did have some flexibility and you kind of knew, well, you know, if we settle this contract, we might drop to 15, but we know that, you know, more kids are coming, we'll get back to 17. If you're sitting down there at 3-4%, you really have no wiggle room at all. And it's just the fact that you never know what's going to happen. I mean, we've had state shutdowns for political reasons. We've had state shutdowns they're mainly for political reasons. They can't settle a bill. Technically, if there's a state shutdown, I mean, eventually the money stops coming in. And you can at least like to have some buffer. I mean, our payroll expenses every twice a month are, $4 to $5 million. It doesn't take long to eat up a $20 million fund balance. And if you don't pay people, they'll stop coming to work.
Eric? Okay. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Next, we have 6.2, and that is our long-range facility planning, and that will be presented by our superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Van Leer. Following the election, we had shared with our community as well as board members that our excitement was shifting to get students and staff back into school, and we have done that, and things are going well. In the past couple of weeks, we have shifted our attention now to conversations and thinking about the process of moving forward and addressing the needs in the district. This includes the identified growth and facility needs that our previous facility plan sought to address. As we have been thinking about our work and timeline moving forward, I'd like to share with the board our tentative thinking and process, but this is also a really great opportunity if there are other areas or things you would like to see as we kind of launch back into it, please feel free to share that. Really 3 areas that we're going to be focused on in the next months. The first, a period of time for listening sessions. Currently, we're looking at the month of October into early November to take time to do listening sessions. Currently, as of today, like 2 o'clock this afternoon. We have 8 tentative dates where parents and community members would be invited to provide feedback. These sessions would be conducted by an external facilitator. At the same time, our principals and district directors would be gathering information from staff across the district. And we have generated 4 questions right now that would be consistent to gather that feedback. Questions like, what did you like about the plan? Were there things in the plan that you did not think were needed or important? What are the biggest issues or concerns facing the school district? So 4 really general questions that we're going to be listening for both macro things and micro things that our community members and staff have to share. We would also like to use our student groups to hear what our students have to say. As we reflected on the 4 questions, we also believe that our students will have a voice from their experience of being in our schools to provide us with some really good feedback around the questions. So the first thing are listening sessions, and as I said, October into early November. The listening session information that's gathered will be used by Morris Leatherman to conduct a community survey. The community survey will cost, we're not sure. We have not gotten any price for a community survey. But our community surveys would be conducted by Morris Leatherman, and I know the board is familiar with Morris Leatherman. Peter Leatherman also just shared with AMSD a survey that they did across the state of Minnesota. This would be asking our communities what their priorities are, as well as looking at the overall tax tolerance for any type of package that we'd be putting together moving forward. We anticipate that the survey and the results would be back mid-January. And then coupled with that, we would also like to retake a look at our demographic study. And in order to use, or to do that demographic study, we would be using Hazel Reinhardt. And many of you are familiar with Hazel. Hazel has been around for a long time. She was the state's demographer as well. We did get a preliminary cost from Hazel. We would anticipate that cost to be approximately $14,000, with her completion for the demographic study to be done by mid-January. So when I put these pieces together, it's the listening sessions will help guide us with survey questions. The survey would be conducted late November into December, with results coming in January. And then parallel to that across the top would be the demographic study. So by mid-January to the end of January, we would have survey results and demographic information. That would then springboard us into thinking about whatever our community and staff and students have shared. That's what's going to launch us into moving forward. You know, an example I would give, if we had a certain tax tolerance that we saw out of our community, as we start to think about the priorities in our district, we would be using that as a guide as we begin to build plans. It could also lead to 1 question, 2 questions, 3 questions. Right now, we don't know until we actually take time to listen. And so in terms of, I've been asked, well, where is the existing plan? Right now, the comprehensive facility plan that we had, it's off the table right now. We're going back to listen, to conduct the community survey, and then we'll be starting over with, we haven't decided if we're going to keep the same structure in terms of 1 task force. The thinking right now is that we would look at multiple groups of stakeholders that we would then be vetting information through, with the decision makers still being that steering committee and leadership committee. So I would just open it up to the board if there are any questions, any more clarification. But in terms of next steps, that is what we're looking at now through January.
Question for Julie?
I have a question. As far as the listening sessions, how is that going to be, I guess, people know that it's happening?
Great question. Because it's tough, because as a district, we don't have everyone's address. We have our own families. So right now, we would do advertising in the school district newspaper. We've also talked about making sure that our city councils and our city leaders have that information, because they also do communication out. We are not thinking at this time, because of the cost, that we would do a required mailing like we do with the election. But that we would work to have 2 or 3 ways where we would make sure that that information gets out to our community. And if there are any other suggestions, or if we want to take a look at or doing a full mailing, we know that from doing previous referendums that to do a postcard mailing to every resident within the school district is expensive. We do have named Star Tribune as our Pioneer Press as our district paper, and so we would make sure that we put an ad there so that we could advertise. And as I said, right now, we have eight different dates selected, both an AM session, many are PM sessions, in person and virtual. So I think we have two of those 8 sessions could be virtual, the other are in person with various times.
When you talk, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, finish, Eric.
I was just gonna, when you talk about the mailings are expensive, what's the price number on that, or the price rather,
I'm looking out.
roughly?
Yep, absolutely. So what Pepe shared from the back was about $15,000 to $18,000 to mail a postcard out.
Could we utilize, I know like the city of Woodbury has the mailing that comes out, and some of the other cities in our district have that too, putting something in those as well.
We talked about that. We're just not sure of the timing of when their mailings go out and when ours do, but we did talk about connecting up with the cities to make sure that if they had communication going out, that we would also double back with that as well.
Could we utilize the messaging that we send home with our students?
We absolutely will, but that's not guaranteed to get to other community members. I will say that when Morris Leatherman conducts the survey, they take all of that into consideration. So they do a cross-section of adults who are not parents in the district. So I don't know if it's 150 phone calls or 200 phone calls. We could certainly get that information from him, but we do tap into the various populations within our school district.
Simi?
So my question is, for the listening sessions, if they're in person and virtual, and there's an external facilitator, right, someone not
Yep.
employed by the school district, are there caps on how many people can participate in those sessions? Or how do we, if there's a session where like 100 people show up, do we have a plan for how to facilitate that?
Yes, we will work with the external facilitator. I believe they could provide us with 3 or 4 people, and we will have to gauge from there. But very skilled facilitators, so I'm sure they would be able to accommodate a larger group.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Okay, Louise? Katie? Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask, were there any thoughts about doing a mailing?
Quite expensive.
I don't think they're very effective, to be honest. If you look at direct mail campaigns and what comes back, I don't know how effective that is.
Do we know? I mean, do we have effectiveness data? Like, I know that, if you do this professionally, like, you would know, like, this kind of thing, direct mail works, or this kind of thing, social media works, or this kind of, you'll know that kind of stuff. Do we have an idea how, from our work in the past or from our referendum mailings, how effective mailings are at achieving the goals that we set out?
So I can add that everyone learns and comprehends communications differently, and so multiple communications are always helpful, and we would reach the people who maybe aren't necessarily tech savvy or go on our website, and so there is benefits to it, and there's also cons, because the other half of people are just going to throw it away because they got the email or they go to the website. So there's pros and cons to each. I would say, at least for our families, we know that phone calls and texting are more impactful than emails. And when you combine all those communications, each of them have a different impact depending on how people consume their media.
Go ahead, Pat.
Well, so I think there's probably some federal rules on just calling everyone in the, who lives in the school district that I'm not aware of, but because we gather family data, that's why we can call them. And so I would have to get more investigate more on kind of what federal rules are for just robocalling everyone in the community, which I would advise against.
Okay, so just because of what you said, I think that a postcard would, something we should think about, because the last one didn't pass, and we don't want anybody to be able to say that they weren't aware of these sessions. That's my thinking on it.
I think it's important that we keep in mind that these sessions, what we're listening for are common themes across our plan, the concerns in the district. We are not asking for feedback right now on any specific plan.
What I meant
I think the purpose is just a little bit different.
what I meant was that they should be aware of the survey. A mailing for the survey was what you were talking about, correct?
Yeah, and the survey actually is conducted by Morris Leatherman, so Morris Leatherman will do the 625 calls. They actually physically call, and we will be working with their team. And, you know, depending upon what we come up with, it might be 20 questions, it might be 25 questions. But in calling and doing that survey in our district, they're basically getting a sampling of adults in our communities who no longer have kids in our schools. So as we talked about it, that is one way that we can engage and hear from families that maybe don't have kids in our district.
Okay,
So-
I get it, yeah.
One of the questions I had was around, Pepe alluded to this with technology. So we know that there's a certain percentage of our students or our families that don't have internet access at home. Are we, like, I know during the pandemic, we provided hotspots and stuff like that. Are we still doing that for those families? Because one of the concerns I have is, like, everyone gets mail, right? And so, but not necessarily everyone has access to the internet. And so I want to make sure that, and I don't know whether the listening sessions are the right time to do it, or if it's later when we have a plan. You know, I do know that sometimes when you communicate too much, people tune out communications, right? And so I want to make sure that we are getting the highest return on investment for the communications that we do make, and generating the right, we're generating the responses that are going to be most helpful to us as we develop the plan and also as we survey the community. And so I would just want us to think about how, you know, where we think a mailer would make sense. And it would be helpful to know if we know these kinds of mailers work better than, you know, some other kind, because I think it would be, I wouldn't want to say no to a mailer. I mean, you know, 15 grand is a lot of cash, but if it gets us, you know, 100 grand closer to a better plan, and I realize that that's not really how math works, but bear with me. That would be kind of our, I mean, then I would be in support of doing a mailer. I just would want to make sure we do it at the most impactful time.
I think that along with the newspaper ad and what we're talking about, working with our cities, coupled with the survey where they intentionally seek out people who live in the district without children, I feel like we've opened that piece up for at least listening and hearing information from them. So I don't know if it's at that point. I think if anything, it's once we begin to develop plans that people in our community are aware of what we're thinking. For me, that would be a higher priority than this early stage right now.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and, I mean, I've been on the board for a while, and I've seen these listening sessions at this stage don't necessarily get a lot of people. People come when they know what they're coming for. So when they come to say, I like this or I don't like this, is when the people tend to come, because they want to give input on the parts of the plan that they either don't like or do like. At this stage, we generally don't get, because when we've asked for people to be on these task force and to be whatever, you sometimes are struggling to find when we've tried to get like at least one per school. I mean, sometimes it's like there's nobody, because nobody wants to be involved necessarily at that early stage. And I think that's what this is more about, is they're just asking those questions. And I think when we're really going to want to try and get people actively involved is when we have listening sessions, when we have parts of a plan, when we know this is what we're going to be doing. And I think that's where we really want to spend the money to get that information out so that people can be aware of what we're coming to. Because if we do this in October, November, we don't have information until January. And then, I mean, we're talking March or April is when we're really going to want to get people invested again. And that's when I'd like to see a postcard or something go out, letting people know this is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, was what the return on investment is. So if people don't show up, sorry, that's what I was asking about the return on investment. If people don't show up to these early listening sessions, then I think a postcard is not the most effective use of our dollars. But to your point about people coming to critique a plan.
Louise, you have anything? Yeah, and we should be mindful too that the different language, our ESL community,
Yep.
and that we make sure so that people are clear on what we're doing in other languages. So that's all I have. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Julie. Don't go away.
I'm up.
Next, we have 7.0, which is an action item, and 7.1 is streaming of workshop meetings. And that will be presented this evening by our Superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
Thank you again. It was August 11th. It seems like even a longer time ago. August 11th, a workshop meeting, the board had a discussion around the live streaming of the workshop meetings themselves. At that meeting, it was asked that I bring back additional information, which was provided to the board. As you're aware, currently the workshop meetings are set up to create an environment where board members can engage in conversation and dialogue around topics on the agenda, that it's not live streamed for the public. Board members and executive cabinet members are typically arranged in various formats. Sometimes it's been a rectangle, and I think one of the videos I sent you had us arranged in a rectangle. Other times it's at tables where conversations are occurring. The regular business meeting, like this evening, is live streamed, and the board assumes their positions up here in front. The additional cost to return to live streaming the workshop meetings would be approximately $2,760 for a total of $12,260 per year, and that quote is attached on the back. So I would ask, I believe that this is the meeting where any action would be taken if there was going to be a change or if we were going to remain the same.
Can I ask a clarification?
Yes.
So we have to make a motion we have to make some kind of motion in order to discuss, correct?
Okay.
Okay.
Correct. So, is it a motion, clarification, Dana?
Yeah, you would just let somebody make a motion if they
Okay.
choose to.
Yep.
You don't have to-
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you. Okay. Is there anyone that wants to make a motion?
Well, maybe I'm confused on this, but is this something that we are going to vote on tonight?
Yes.
Okay, so
It's
do I
an
need to
action
make a
item.
motion to facilitate that?
You would
Exactly.
need to make a motion you would either make a motion to stream or make a motion not to stream, and then there would have to be a second on either motion. Then we could have the discussion and then the vote.
Okay, then I will make a motion in the affirmative to stream.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Nope.
No.
No? All right, Discussion. Discussion?
I would like to somehow, we discussed at our workshop meeting about having some type of trial period rather than doing a whole year. If we could do like a 3-month period or something, a quarterly thing to see how it goes, to see if we're getting views, rather than paying that full amount.
Louise?
I understand Melinda's comment on how many people actually view. I do believe there's the viewing public, and then it's who talks to the viewing public as well. So irregardless of the number of views, I think there's a bigger impact outside of how many actually view. So I'm not sure that's the measure I would use.
Yeah, so my only actually concern about this, going back to streaming, is literally just the mechanics of how we talk. I mean, one of the things I really have appreciated about our workshop meetings is that we've been able to have these small group dialogues or have dialogues around a table. It's much more, it feels more collegial and less, official, right, than sitting up here. And so I would really hate to lose, I would hate for us to have to sit up here just to have the workshop meetings. But I really, I like the idea of if there's a way we can stream while we're in our, however the workshop needs to be set up for us to do our business best. Because I think, to your point, like, it's helpful for, we may only get 5 people watching us or whatever, but I think it's also just helpful for people to, if they do have a point of clarification, to be able to go back and watch, or to, when someone says something, people can do their own, they can look for themselves and see, okay, this is what I'm hearing Simi's words differently, for example, right? If someone says something, Simi said X on the internet. And so I think from that standpoint, I think it's helpful for, the community to see us do the workshop, because I think one of the other concerns I had as we went through this bond process is that because we're only here, that these are the only times that people can see the work that we do if they don't happen to come to the meeting, that it feels like maybe people can't see the 3 hours that we spend in a workshop discussing, each proposal or whatever, and so they don't necessarily get a full picture of the work that happens outside of this meeting, or a fuller picture, I should say.
I agree with Simi on that, as far as, I think there's a lot of benefit in the public having that ability to be able to actually go back and watch that stream. I don't want to end up being back here in the dais for those workshop meetings. I have gone back and watched some of the old recordings, and when we are in that rectangle format, you can hear pretty well what's going on. I mean, enough to make out what's going on. When we were in the little individual tables, you couldn't as much, but when we're in that triangle, you can, the rectangle, you can. And we are, we are a public entity, so I don't have a problem with that being recorded. But once again, I think it would be good if we could have a trial period somehow.
And maybe when we think about the setup and what's on the agenda, we can work to organize into that rectangular shape, and if need be, we would communicate with board members just that this is going to be in small groups, so there may be portions of this that you're unable to hear because the discussion is occurring in a small group. But anytime we've done that, I believe we've always done like a large group share out. And so that's an opportunity then to summarize for anybody who's watching.
That's a great idea.
To Luis's point, there are people that, just because we don't get a lot of views, doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't talking about it. I really don't want to lose those small groups. And that's my big thing is, I think when we were working on the bond, I think a lot of information got shared in those small groups that if we were in a large group, I don't think we would have as much opportunity to share that information. I don't think that we can be mic'd at those times. That would have to be something that we'd have to, somebody can announce that this portion will not be on the microphone. Make sure everybody has them turned off, because you don't want a lot of, and people thinking they hear something that maybe they don't hear or something. And then do the share outs. We always do the share outs, and obviously it's not going to be word for word what was said by each person, but I think it is, that portion is okay. I do feel like sometimes when the microphone and the camera is off, that some people do feel a little more like they can speak their mind, because they know that it's not going to be on the internet, or ask a question that maybe they feel would be like a silly question and they not want to ask it. And I just don't want to lose that, where somebody doesn't feel like they can ask a question because they don't want to seem like they don't know what they're talking about. And that's the one thing I don't want people to lose, is that ability to feel like they can share that information and not have somebody throw it back in in their face for asking a question that somebody might think is a silly question.
I do get that, but then we also have audience members that have been recording us anyway.
Exactly.
True, but it's different when somebody has to go to somebody that maybe has 100 followers versus a YouTube channel that somebody can know to go to. I think there is a big difference in that. And I just want people to feel comfortable asking the question. And I know people in the past have asked a question at a board meeting and it's been put on that why don't they know this? They're on the school board, they should know this. And that's not okay. I mean, we're just like everybody else. I mean, besides Pat and Melinda, we don't have an educational, and Louise.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. You were on this side of me. I mean, so a majority of the board does not have an education background. And I think that's important too, to know that we have to ask those questions, and that's really the only time that we can talk to each other and get sometimes those questions answered.
Pat?
I like the idea of having those sessions, with the small groups, and then the share out is recorded. I think that'll work well for us.
I mean, I just, like I said earlier, I don't want to lose the intimacy and the collegiality that we have in our workshop meetings, because I agree with you, Katie, like, we get such good work done there. We have such good conversations, and, yeah, until you brought up that people may use your words against you. I mean, I say boneheaded things all the time, so it didn't occur to me until you just said it that someone would do that. But, I'm, I guess, secure in my boneheadedness.
Are those sessions taped? They're not taped, are they?
What sessions?
The workshops?
Currently?
Yeah,
No.
not right now. Okay. I was going to say, maybe that's the way we could get around it. Because I like us being able to demonstrate how we feel candidly and not have it thrown back in our face. And they are being taped. They are being taped. And so people, I mean, that want, and also it's transcribed. It doesn't go out in the district news.
So, thank you, that's a good reminder. So one of the things, I think it was when you came back from one of your conferences with all the many ideas you brought back, it was great. I like when people come back from a conference and they have like 100 great ideas, but this was really a good idea. After our board meetings, we are going to be summarizing. So if a board meeting is on Thursday nights, staff will get the summary of the board meeting on Sunday nights, and then the following Thursday, our families would get it. Only because 4 o'clock, I believe it's 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, our staff and, our family newsletter goes out. And so it's not ready for, obviously, today, so we would have to wait a week. But they will be getting kind of a summary of every board meeting along with a link to the information. So that's another way we're working to increase transparency in what we're doing, so people have that quick link to go get the information about a board meeting.
Aren't we talking about the link going right to the actual recorded board
Yep, we
meeting?
would go right to the board meeting link, but also to the documents, because sometimes, depending upon some of the financial updates, it's beneficial to be able to actually look at some of the PowerPoints, because we know that's one area that, as we heard, the transparency around budget, every board meeting we have a budget update. And so if people really want that information, we will make sure the link is right there, and then they can access it either through the family newsletter or the staff newsletter.
Do we know how many clicks we get on those links to actually go to our board meeting summary?
Well, the first summary for staff news will be on Sunday, so we'll be able to start measuring those on Sunday, this coming Sunday, and then for family news next Thursday.
So we haven't started it yet?
Nope, that it would start with this meeting. This meeting would actually be summarized for Sunday.
Okay.
Staff first.
So you can
excuse me,
share then
staff
in a
and
while
families. Yeah.
how, I'm just curious, I know, and it really has nothing to do with this, it's just because you brought it up. So I'd be curious to see how many, people are actually
But
clicking.
I think what it has to do with is just overall engagement of our staff, our families, our community members with the process of, and the work that the board is doing and administration is doing. And so I see that as a benefit.
And it will obviously ebb and flow. You
Right.
know, if there's a hot topic, we'll get more clicks.
And maybe if there's a hot topic, people will see it there.
Yeah.
People will see it there, and they will know that this isn't just new. Like, we actually have gone through a 2 or 3 year process with this.
In terms of the summary, are we talking about decisions and actions or summarizing conversation?
Sorry, Pepe, I should have had you up here.
Yeah, it'll likely, well, I think we'll have to see because workshops are just discussions. So I think we're thinking a sentence or 2 bullet for each topic and just summarizing those with links back to any documents.
Pepe, for our weekly emails, both to community members, you're very popular, both to community members and for staff, do we know what kind of open rates we get on those emails? Like the Connect ones?
Right now, I can just recall staff
Okay.
open rates, and so they range into 48 to 50, which is actually pretty high.
Pretty good, yeah.
Three.
3 kids, 3 staff members.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay, and remember, the cost is $12,000. $12,000.
Did everyone get a chance to speak, Sharon?
Yeah, I think so.
Did you have any comments, Eric? or-
Eric, you have any?
Okay.
Louise?
Would echo so much of the conversation here that I do not want to miss the arrangement of the workshop meeting allows us to get a lot of work done that would not work in this format.
So,
Thank you. Katie? Well,
Oh, I'm good.
you good? Melinda? Okay.
no, my,
Little Stimmy?
I
This
think
is
it's
like-
going where I was going to go with your next question. probably.
so one of the is, so I'm in full support of recording if we can keep our intimate seating. So is it possible to amend the motion to say we will, or do we need to amend the motion to say we will do this, assuming we'll sit in this kind of,
But we can't guarantee that. That cannot be guaranteed.
Didn't say anything about where we would sit, though.
That can't be guaranteed. We may have to be up here.
oh, that's true. Okay, so you're, like, so we wouldn't have to amend it, we wouldn't amend it for maximum flexibility?
Exactly.
Okay.
Pat?
Was that in line with you?
Because, I mean, I think the plan would be to do the workshop like we are, record it. If it doesn't work, then we'd have to go up here. But if then, if then board members decided they didn't want to do that, we could make a new, we
Okay.
could put it on the agenda again and change it. So I think, from my understanding, it would be the workshops, which are done down there. If we vote yes, would be recorded down there. If it doesn't work, or board members are like, this isn't working, then we could put it on the agenda again and vote again.
Pat, you have any comments?
No, I'm good. I think that's a good plan.
Okay. Everybody's done? All right. So we have a motion on the floor. Can I get a motion to approve the streaming workshop meeting?
We already did that.
Oh, okay.
We're
It's,
just going to take a vote.
okay. Oh, thank you. All those in favor then?
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay. So the motion carried. All
Thank you.
right. Thank you. Next is 7.2, and that's workers' compensation insurance renewal, and that will be done by Dan Pine, Director of Finance.
Chair Van Leer, members of the school board, excuse me, Superintendent Nielsen. Annually, we are given workers' compensation renewal rates, and we do like to bring those to the school board so they can approve those and we can sign off on those. We entered into a contract with, excuse me, SFM a while back, back in 2010, as they had the best rates at the time, and they've been the best vendor we've had and the best rates ever since. This year, we're seeing a decrease of about $12,000, although our covered payroll is going up about 5%. So that's a very encouraging thing, and the main reason is because our mod rate has gone down to under 1. If you looked at the chart I put in the package, you'll see that we did have our mod rates for a while back under 0.9, and that's what we're going for. So 1.0 would be like an average district. And if you get below 1, it really helps your rates. And it really helps us a lot because we have very high rates of $1 million a year. So if we can save any kind of money, because when I look at work comp and I budget that, and I'm going to increase our payroll by, 5, 6%, I have to increase our work comp premium the same way, but it went down. And the reason I want to bring it up too is because it's really thanks to the outstanding work of the Human Resources Department. And back when Abby Baker was the assistant director, she was very involved in work comp, and she worked hard to get our mod rates down through management of claims and management of employees that are on at workers' comp. And then ever since she became director, Brittany Beatty in the HR department has done an outstanding job. And I just wanted to give her a shout out that she's doing a lot of great work in workers' comp that's keeping our costs down. So with that, I just ask for your approval to enter into another year contract with SFM at these rates.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the renewal?
So moved.
Any comments or discussion?
I have one.
Second.
Oh, second, I'm sorry. Second.
Question, but I think Eric has one also.
I do have one. yeah.
Okay, Eric.
What's a mod rate?
It's the rating the insurance company gives a covered entity, and it has to do with their experience. So it's really a modification experience rate. So it's as they look at your claims, and if you have a lot of claims and not paying enough to cover those claims, then your modification rate will go up over 1. And then they'll take that number and multiply it by your covered payroll. So if you're over 1, you're going to pay more than you normally would. If you're under 1, you're going to pay less than you normally would. So it's an experience rate.
So essentially, the trend in the last few years anyway is we're having less workers' comp claims.
That and the severity of the claims, or I shouldn't say severity, but the amount of the claims. So even you might have more claims, but if you manage them really well and you get people back on their feet and get them back on their jobs, you won't pay as much in work comp claims, and then that will keep your mod down too. So it's a combination, but yeah, some of it's less claims too.
Do you think any of, I was gonna say, do you think any of that has any bearing on the pandemic and, a lot of kids were at home and staff were at home for that in 2020?
It could be. A lot of our claims have to do with special education and biting and hitting and things like that. But COVID was a little weird too, because even there was a lot of proposals to include COVID claims under work comp, and claims were made that may have been COVID related, but they weren't officially. So it was just kind of a weird year to roll out. But I think, we always want to look, like in 3-4 year trends to see how we're doing. Abby and her team review with our claims people 4 times a year on what's happening with each claim and things like that. So we kind of keep an idea. And we actually have, with part of our health and safety program, we have to have a health and safety committee that meets once a quarter, and we'll probably revisit that and bring that together. And a lot of times, it's hard in a district this big because we have 25 buildings, but in my other districts, we would have reps from each building, and then we would talk about what's happening that's unsafe for employees and things like that. Yeah, it's hard to know what effect COVID had on work comp. But you're right, if they're not one-to-one with the kids, it does take off some of the risk.
So I had 2 questions. One, do we have any payroll that's excluded from work? Like, are there any employees who are not covered by workers' comp? Okay.
No, they're put in different classifications.
But like even we're part of the workers' comp bucket?
I'd have to look because you're not
Right.
technically employees.
Right? But I don't know. But we do get a stipend, right? So, or does that not count?
Yeah, you fall under the office classification. I mean, they classify into 4 different classifications. And there's the teacher classification, and then there's the office, and then there's the higher ones like the drivers and then the maintenance workers. But if you fell off your chair, yeah, you suppose you could put a claim in. Call Abby right away and do a first report of injury.
I mean, I'm very clumsy. And so the other question I had was, can you talk a little bit about the retention program and how that works and how we benefit from that?
Well, if our claims, so they set a retention at, and we haven't had a retention in the last couple of years, and hopefully we may get one. But basically, they'll set a number, the underwriters will, and say, okay, your premium is $1 million. And we're setting the retention rate at $780,000. And they'll average it, we're doing it on a 2-year plan now, but we'll just figure it's a 1-year retention. So if you can keep your claims under $780,000, then since they charge you $1 million and they have to spend that much, they'll return the $200,000. If our claims go over $1 million, go over our premiums, then there's no retention. But it's one way for them to underwrite a little lower rate. It's an incentive for us not to have as many claims either.
Is it really that direct? Because I just think, like, if we have $700,000 in claims on $1 million premium, and we would get back a $300,000 retention, how do they make money? Or is that built into the claim?
Well, the retention, I just was throwing numbers.
Oh,
I don't know
okay,
what our
okay,
exact
so it's not
numbers
like a
are.
one-to-one.
Yeah.
That's what I was confused
They'll
about.
build
Okay.
in the administrative costs.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
And the retention doesn't get figured out for like 4 years because they hold claims open for so long. So it takes them a long time for them, okay, we can finally close out that year because they got to keep them open for the claims. We just
So
got
there's
to
like a long tail.
Yeah.
So if I fall today, I'm not gonna fall, but if I fall today and then like 3 years from now, my doctor says, oh, this injury is due to the fall you had at the school board meeting on such and such a date, then they still have to pay out for those.
Yeah, you'll probably get a big fight from our adjusters, right, Abby? I don't know. But, yeah, a good example is we just got a check for $15,000 from MSBA, Minnesota School Board Association, because we belong to a workers' comp trust in 2007. And they shifted our reserve a required reserve from $45,000 to $30,000. So they're still holding on to $30,000 15 years later in case something else hits.
And of course, we don't get any interest or anything on that.
No, but at least we got the 15,000.
Pay for recording the meetings.
Any other questions? Okay, so I have clarification. This was motioned by Pat, seconded by Eric. Am I correct? Oh, Melinda.
I didn't, was it me?
I thought you motioned and I seconded.
I don't remember. It was,
Pat motioned, but there was 2 people that motioned.
And Melinda second. Thank you. That's why I wanted to clarify. All right.
Eric's looking surprised over there like this.
All right. All those in favor of the renewals say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Next, it's don't go away, Dan. 7.3 is the 2023 preliminary levy, and that will be presented by Dan Pine.
Good evening again. We talked at the last meeting about the preliminary levy. About 25 to 26% of our general fund dollars come from a direct levy, and about 30%, which equals about 30% of our total revenue because there's debt service in the levy. Levies are set by the state Department of Education, or the limits are, and they'll go through, and there's certain things you can levy for, and there's some things that you levy and you split the cost with the state, as half aid and half levy. So as those are all calculated by the Department of Education, they send those out to us and we bring those to you so you can approve some kind of levy by September 30th. And the reason they want this preliminary levy approved by September 30th is so that we can send the information to the county, which will then prepare proposed tax notices that come out usually in late November. And those notices have to come out before we have the truth and taxation hearings, because by law, you must approve your levy by the end of December. But this is the first step where we ask you to approve a preliminary levy. Now, I'll talk about a few of the levy categories, just so we're clear on what the levy is. The levy isn't all our revenue, and just because the levy goes up doesn't necessarily mean that the district gets more revenue, because sometimes the levy will go up and the aid that works in conjunction with it goes down. So it depends on what kind of levy it is. So if you look on the attachment, I've put what's estimated right now, because this levy has changed every day since the last time we talked. And there's little minor changes in it, and we're still waiting for our OPEB levy to be put on there. But for that reason, that we will be asking you to approve what's called the maximum levy. And the reason we have to ask for a maximum levy instead of a certain dollar amount at this point is because the dollar amounts will change as the state makes adjustments. And by law, you cannot increase the levy you approved on September 30th, but you can go down. So knowing that there's a lot of changes that have to be made by the Department of Education for all 343 districts, or among 343 districts, they've made a caveat to say that school boards can approve maximum, meaning that the county auditor, when they're ready to post tax notices and start posting tax bills, they will reach out to MDE and say, give us South Washington County's most recent levy because the board approved a maximum. Then when we get to December and you approve your final levy, because what they need now will only go on the proposed notices. What goes on the bill is what you approve in December. And that's when you have exact numbers. And I may suggest, oh, well, let's under levy in Q comp like we usually do, because we know how much money we need and we don't have to levy all of it. But at this point, we'll levy maximum and then we'll make those adjustments in December. Some of the things that you levy for are the referendum and the local optional revenue. Those are the two amounts that account for about $2,250 per pupil. And that's your extra operating levy that was approved by the voters. The referendum dollars are now tied to inflation, so that amount will go up based on the inflation set by the Department of Education. Equity and transition levies are basically a combination of aid and levy. They're put in place to equalize districts based on their property wealth, and those will go up or down based on how much aid is generated, so that's a flat amount that comes in. ATPPS is Q comp. That's a program that we have, a teacher incentive program that we have that the board approved many, many years ago, and we get aid on that, full aid, and then you levy up to what the budget we need. We'll talk more about that in December. Operating capital is a combination of aid and levy. Achievement integration is a program that's approved by the Department of Education and by the board. That's a combination of aid and levy. Unemployment, all our unemployment claims are paid directly. We do not do unemployment tax like private businesses do. So we have to guess how much we're going to pay each year. During COVID, we guessed that we were going to pay $1 million because that's what the bill said. But a lot of those claims were paid off with ERA dollars by the state. So we over levied last year. So this year we're going to under levy by $900,000. So you're seeing a big drop in that levy. Safe schools and safe school intermediate. Safe school has to do with a program in which we levy a certain amount per student, and we use those dollars to pay for our SROs. We use it to pay for mental health services, and we use it to pay for cameras on buses, cameras in school buildings, and just general overall safety. The intermediate just means that we levy that and give that money to 916 for the same reason. Career tech is self-explanatory. Lease levy, you remember during Long Range Facility Planning, we mentioned that we lease 2 spaces for our 18 to 21-year-old program. We also lease space for early childhood at Central Park. We also lease space on golf courses for our golf program. We lease hockey arenas for our hockey programs and for FIED. So all that goes into what's called lease levy, and that's about $4 million a year. Then the other big one is long-term facility maintenance, and we go over that plan every June and approve that in July, and we spend about $20 million a year on long-term facility maintenance, which is a combination of levy, and a little bit of aid and bonding. And then capital projects levy was approved by the voters, and we receive about $2.8 million a year to use for technology. So those are generally the things. If you have any other questions on what we levy for, you're welcome to ask. I mean, obviously, but so we kind of summarized it there. I'm estimating right now the levy will go up about 7.5%. That will probably change, but this is like the highest point I could see it being at. And we saw that our values went up about 5.5% on all fronts. Our new construction went up almost 30%. So that's the big one. When new construction goes up, that means that there's more tax base coming in, as opposed to just values going up. That could be everybody's values just going up by market reasons. But new construction is the one to look at. So I would just ask for a motion to approval of the maximum preliminary levy.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the changes?
So moved.
Moved by Simi, second by Katie. Is there any discussion? Nobody? Okay.
I do have a quick question. On the debt service, is there a goal there as far as the percentage of the whole?
Yes, for debt service, what we try to do is maintain what's called the tax rate. And at this point, we're trying to maintain like a 31% tax rate. So when we sell bonds, and you might not remember, but when Jody Zesba came and explained, when we're selling these bonds, and then they do this chart, and it's called our debt plan. And what we'll do is we'll look at all the different debts we have. Long-term facility maintenance, building bonds are the main ones. And then, they'll look at the levy for capital projects and the lease levy. And they take all those levies, add them together, and they want to keep those at 30% of the tax capacity. So if we issue new debt, we look at ways of paying off old debt first, refinancing. We look at ways of structuring the payment so that we can keep that payment level on the debt service. This one went up a little bit, mainly because I think we just started a new long-term facility maintenance bond. But our advisors look at that tax rate and try to look at the ones that are falling off before we put new ones on, or they structure the payments differently. But that's our goal, Eric, is really to keep it that 31% tax rate.
Okay.
And we knew that, and we said that when we went out for the bonds, that, yeah, this is a commitment to raising the tax rate. So then they wanted to leave it at about 40%. But that's our ultimate goal on the debt service.
And you've been pretty successful long-term at doing that, or keeping it about that rate?
Yeah, it's been keeping there, and as we look at it for the future, with no impending debt coming on, and eventually debt falling off, like Eastridge is the big one, we could be seeing the debt service tax rate go down. So, and once again, too, we also look at refinancing whenever we can, refunding and lowering some of those payments.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the changes? Can I get it? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried.
Thank you.
Next is 7.4, proposed policy changes, and that will be presented by Superintendent.
Thank you again. This evening, I'm bringing forth, after our workshop meeting, 3 policies for approval this evening. 301.1 is an administrative organizational plan. It's important to note that as we go through reviewing policies, you will typically see state statutes or legal references or cross-references at the bottom of a policy. That means that they typically are required, and Minnesota School Board Association wants us to have those policies or actually requires us to have those policies, I should say. What you'll note about 301.1 Administrative Organizational Plan is there are no citings of law. It's not a requirement by Minnesota School Board Association. It actually is a process that is already in place. Our organizational chart is posted on, I believe it's when you go underneath the school board, or I don't know, my picture's up there along with all the executive cabinet, and you can see the full structure. And so we have organizational charts for every department, but our executive cabinet is clearly posted online. And so the recommendation for that one is to remove the policy, and we would continue that practice. Policy 305 is around policy implementation, and the only adjustments to that is just some clarification in language underneath the general statement of policy. And policy 307, records retention. For that policy, there were no suggested changes by the Policy Review Committee. So with that, I am asking for approval of those 300 series policies.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the changes?
So move.
Second.
Moved by who was it first?
Pat?
Pat, and seconded by Eric. Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. 8.1, Superintendent's Report. Julie Nielsen.
I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking here. First up, our strategic plan. The board knows that you're on notice. We're rolling around to November and December when we will be able to bring information back. So we are kind of in the final months of preparing information. You will see going out to students, staff, and to parents information, or I should say a survey, around the daily desired experience. We took time at our last meeting, our last strategic plan meeting, I believe it was last week, to do some drafting, and now we're going to go back and get input on those daily desired experiences. The next two areas, transportation and nutrition services. I don't know that there's a school district not struggling with staffing. That also goes for special education, and as I've been in conversation with board members, we need to look at both short-term and long-term solutions for transportation and nutrition services. And so, working with Dan Pyan, I have asked Carrie Olson, our Director of Transportation, and Wendy Peterson, our Director of Nutrition Services, to really sit down and take a look at how might we continue to provide a high-quality service, but we need to be able to scale that back for the workforce we have. We know that our transportation department, our bus drivers, are a group that are retiring, close to retirement, and we need to be able to sustain that. And right now, we still have routes that are unfilled. And so we are going to be looking at both short and long-term, hopefully, solutions to solve our lack of staffing. Right alongside of that, and we saw our paraprofessional group here today, there are massive shortages in paraprofessionals, and we do have to think about how do we redesign the work of paraprofessionals and how do we reprioritize how we use them. This week, we had, and when I say we, our human resources directors, superintendents, and special education directors had a meeting at 9:16. As you're aware, 9:16 provides our Federal 4 special education services. And right now, they don't have the staff to intake our students who are requiring that level of service and support. So all of us together, all the member districts with 9:16, we are all working together on what are those solutions. And what was interesting is we look to help support and solve the 9:16. Really what we're doing is we're looking at every one of our districts because we are all facing the exact same thing when it comes to staffing. So continued conversation around paraprofessionals and special education. And then finally, just to end, we would like to congratulate Lake Middle School for being the only middle school in the state of Minnesota to receive the National Blue Ribbon Award. I was over there today. They all received a bonus. I did buy them $100,000 grand bars. I said that was the best kind of bonus I could give them, but they were very excited, and that truly is a reflection of the great work, not just at Lake Middle School, but our entire school district. So congratulations to Lake Middle School, the administration, and staff.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, what a great work. That brings us to 9.0, our future meeting dates. We have a school board workshop meeting on October the 6th at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. And because of MEA, we will have a school board business meeting on Tuesday, September 22nd. It means October. It says September, but October what? 22nd? 18th? Okay. at the District Service Center. I don't have a calendar, so at 6 p.m. And finally, with that, we have 10.0. We are adjourned.